And then he takes into account the faults and weakness of Shakespeare. It is in the second section. And in the third section, he makes a comparison between the plays of Shakespeare with contemporary poetry and drama. And towards the end, he produces a history of Shakespearean criticism, speaking about the critics like A.C. Bradley and his intention in the project. So altogether, from the preface, we come to find that Johnson praises Shakespeare and he justifies his violations of unities and the use of tragicomedy. And these are violations actually producing tragicomedy and the saying farewell to the unities. And the major fault of Shakespeare enlisted in the preface is lack of moral purpose. Actually, Shakespeare is found sacrificing virtue for convenience. And then Johnson makes discussion on Shakespeare's fondness, his special interest in puns and quibbles. Shakespeare was a master of using puns and quibbles. There were many number of quibbles and puns found in Shakespeare. And he has got an ornate, very decorative and pompous, a bombarding and ornate diction also in the plays. And there is chronological tampering, anachronism. So the major fault enlisted by Dr. Johnson are lack of moral purpose in Shakespeare and his special interest for puns and quibbles and the use of the ornate and pompous diction and then the anachronisms, the historical tamperings, the chronological tamperings found in the plays. And Johnson starts the preface with liberal praise of Shakespeare. He refers to Shakespeare portraying human nature very faithfully, and he says that Shakespeare had portrayed human nature very faithfully in his plays. And Johnson refers to Shakespeare holding a faithful mirror. According to Johnson, Shakespeare is found holding a faithful mirror to the human nature. And Johnson points out that Shakespeare has got no heroes. So in the course, he comes to say that Shakespeare has got no heroes, but ordinary men and women. And it is in this context we have to remember the opinion made by John Ruskin about Shakespeare's heroes and heroines. According to him, the hero is a big zero before the heroine. The heroine is the be-all and the end-all of Shakespeare's play. And the hero is only a zero before the heroine. And it was the opinion made by Ruskin. And Johnson is also of the view that Shakespeare has got no heroes, but only men and women. And the heroes can be identified among the members of a society. Therefore, the heroes are ordinary men and women. And Johnson, in this regard, rejects all the allegations put against Shakespeare by literary critics like Dennis and Voltaire. Voltaire actually criticized Shakespeare in a very rough manner, calling him a drunkard, a playwright who produced drunkards in his plays. And there was also John Dennis and Voltaire who spoke against Shakespeare. And in the preface actually, Johnson is trying to give an answer to the criticism leveled against Shakespeare by Dennis and Voltaire. In the preface, we come to find Johnson trying to answer the opinions made by Dennis and Voltaire on Shakespeare. Johnson rejects all the allegations of critics like Dennis and Voltaire, and they referred to Shakespeare's Roman senators as buffoons. They referred to Shakespeare's Roman senators, and there are many Roman senators introduced in the plays, and they are referred to as buffoons. and the Danish king has been referred to as a foolish drunkard. And according to Johnson, fools and drunkards can be found in any society. They can be seen among all classes of people. And it is not a good reason to criticize Shakespeare for the presentation of the buffoons and fools. Voltaire and Dennis commented that Shakespeare had produced the Roman senators looking like buffoons, and the Danish king looked like a drunkard with no stability in his opinion. And Johnson justifies Shakespeare's intermixing of tragic and comic elements, and the mistakes are all justified by Johnson one by one. And to the comment of Dennis and Voltaire, he answers that drunkards and buffoons can be found among any class of society. In the society, we come to find that there are the buffoons and the drunkards, and it is no big reason to criticize Shakespeare. And then there are the other criticisms leveled against Shakespeare, that Shakespeare tried to mix the tragic and comic elements. And according to him, the first duty of a writer is to portray real life. And for this comment, Johnson comes to describe that the first duty of any writer is to portray real life. And seen in this light, Shakespeare is not guilty of any artistic sin. Johnson points out that rules are to be insisted for ordinary writers. And Johnson comes to tell that there may be rules to be insisted for ordinary persons, and a genius like Shakespeare should be evaluated with a new set of weight and measures. And a genius like Shakespeare could be evaluated not with the ordinary rules meant for the ordinary writers. Shakespeare was an excellent writer, an exceptional writer, and in fact, new set of rules and measures should be adopted in judging the works of Shakespeare. And sometimes we will have to go beyond the rules and apply common sense also. And Dr. Johnson here comes to speak about common sense, and we don't actually come to find common sense as a principle from Johnson. Only here in the preface to Shakespeare, while defending Shakespeare, he comes to say that we can adopt common sense in judging Shakespeare. Beyond the rules, there must be the common sense. Even the Bible asserts that a tree is to be judged by its fruits. And we should have to understand who was Shakespeare. Like a tree judged by its fruits, Shakespeare is to be judged for his place, enrichment in literature. Shakespeare had enriched literature. And therefore, we should have to adopt new sets of measures and weights, in fact, to judge the works of Shakespeare. And the common rules are meant only for the common writers. And Shakespeare was a genius, was an excellent writer, and he should be evaluated with a new set of weights and measures. If Shakespeare had mixed tragic and comic elements, so there is justification. Johnson comes to say that these type of rules are made only for the ordinary writers. But for a writer like Shakespeare, his genius is to be taken into consideration. And the enrichment he had made in literature should be taken into consideration. And we have to apply common sense. A new set of rules must be made for judging Shakespeare. And for that he quotes a line from the Bible also. Bible says that a tree is to be judged by its fruits. And when a writer is to be considered, he is to be judged by his contribution. And Shakespeare was a person who contributed elaborately and enriched literature. And Johnson comments on the relative superiority of Shakespeare's comedies and tragedies. The relative superiority of Shakespeare's comedies on his tragedies. And this is one very important area in the preface. According to Johnson, Shakespeare's vision was basically comic. His comedies appear more natural than his tragedies. His comedies seem to be the product of instinct. In the opinion of Dr. Johnson, the comedies of Shakespeare were the product of his instinct, whereas his tragedies were products of skill. Once you say asked this point, so by giving a blank area, asking the students to fill the area with a word, supplant a word in the blank area. And the question was, as far as Shakespeare was concerned, in the opinion of Dr. Johnson, the comedies seemed to be products of instinct, whereas the tragedies seemed to be product of what? Product of skill. So he produces the tragedies using all his ability and skill. So it took him great work, in fact, to produce the tragedies. The tragedies made him perspire. Tragedies produced out of perspiration. So he was made to perspire. So his brow sweated while producing the tragedies. But while producing comedies, so he felt at ease. So he was inspired to write the comedies. Comedies actually produced out of inspiration, and tragedies were produced out of perspiration. Johnson is of the view that Shakespeare is basically a dramatist with a comic vein. And Johnson explains the secret of Shakespeare's success as a dramatist. Shakespeare actually dealt with the basic and unchanging passions of human life. And this is the reason why Shakespeare became a successful playwright. In the opinion of Dr. Johnson, Shakespearean drama was like a rock lying in the stream of life. So his drama looked like a rock lying in the stream of life. And when the waters flowed around the rock, it didn't actually damage the rock. On the other hand, the flowing of the water only polished and softened the rock. And a simile is used here by Johnson. Johnson uses the metaphor of a rock, in fact, to show the dramas of Shakespeare. The dramas of Shakespeare appeared like a rock in the middle of a stream. It didn't actually disturb the flow of the water. On the other hand, the flow of the water smoothened and polished the rock, and it started shining well. By the passage of time, the place appeared more effective, more interesting, and more illuminating. And Johnson condemns Shakespeare mostly on minor matters, and there are a few condemnations also made by Johnson. And very interestingly, he comes to say that Shakespeare produced a number of anachronisms, historical tamperings. So in his history play, we come to find that there are a few historic tamperings. The dates are tampered. Chronological tamperings are all there. And the anachronisms can be left out. And another target of attack is his weakness for quibbles. So Johnson actually speaks about the minor errors made by Shakespeare and condemns him for that. And Johnson doesn't altogether praise Shakespeare. There are a few condemnations also. But the condemnations are on minor matters. He refers to Shakespeare's anachronism, and it's pardonable as far as a writer is concerned. He should not be very apt in chronology, and sometimes aptness could not satisfy the situation, and this may be the reason why Shakespeare might have gone for the chronological tamperings, and Shakespeare may be pardoned for that. And another target of attack made by Johnson is Shakespeare's weakness for quibbles. So the short interesting phrases, normally we come to find in Shakespeare very interesting quibbles and proverbs. And Shakespeare was very fond of the quibbles. And the quibbles lead Shakespeare astray. Actually, he may be led astray. From the main storyline, he will be drifted. He will be taken away from the main storyline following a quibble. Following a proverb, he may divert from the main theme. So it appeared like a will-o'-wisp. Will-o'-wisp was the bogey places that lured the travelers. So in the night, the travelers will be lured by the lights found in the marshes. So in the bogey and marshy areas, there may be some chemical reaction that a few lights could be found in such areas in the night. So there is the sparking of a few chemicals in the bogs. And travelers who are strangers to the area may think that there may be some place of habitation because the light has been there. And they may go into the bog and become ditch. And this is what called the will-o'-wisp. And Shakespeare also followed the light, like the traveler following the light and getting into the bog. And Shakespeare, following quibbles, actually deviated from the storyline. And a quibble to him was like the will-o'-wisp. And there was, very interestingly, his following the quibbles was like the following of the golden apple. And very interestingly, Johnson describes the way Shakespeare followed the quibbles was like following the golden apple. And in golden apple we come to find that there is the reference to a Greek mythological story of Atlanta. So she is a character in Greek mythology. And she was a virgin huntress. She was a huntress living in the forest. And she was unwilling to marry. And actually her father was a king who left her to be dead on the top of a mountain. He actually wanted to have a son. But when he found that a girl was born, he wanted to leave the girl on the top of the mountain. He wanted the girl to be dead there. But fortunately the girl was saved by a she-bear, a female bear, found the child and saved the child, gave her milk, and she was brought up in the forest under the care of the animals there. She learned the animal language. And she lived with the animals, and she was a huntress. And she could run like animals, like deers, like lions. Fast running huntress. And at a later stage, her father identified her and wanted to bring her back. And he also suggested her to get married. But Atlanta was not prepared to marry a person who could not run like her. And she was a swift-footed runner. And she wanted the man who could run across her to become able to marry her. And she put a wagon. A person who could overtake her in running could alone marry her. She insisted that the man who should marry should overtake her in running. And if the person could not overtake her, the person could be dead. He would be killed by Atlanta. And the people were afraid, in fact, to make the wager with Atlanta to get into the running competition. And there appeared a man named Hippomenes. And he was aided by the goddess Aphrodite. The goddess Aphrodite aided Hippomenes, offered him 3 golden apples, and asked him to divert the attention of Atlanta by throwing the golden apples. And Hippomenes came and engaged in the competition, and the running race started. And as the running race progressed, Hippomenes threw a golden apple, and on finding the golden apple, Atlanta diverted her way and followed the golden apple. And again Atlanta overtook Hippomenes, Hippomenes threw the next golden apple, and again the attention was diverted. And at the third time he threw the apple, and when Atlanta followed the apple, he crossed the boundary and he became the winner, and he got married with Atlanta. Atlanta was forced to marry him. And after marriage, they copulated in a temple of Zeus. And when it was identified, they were cursed to become lions. Actually, the story is the story of Atlanta diverted by the golden apples. And here, Dr. Johnson comes to say that a kibble was to Shakespeare like a will of wisp that made the travelers fell into the box. Again, a kibble was to Shakespeare like the golden apple that diverted the way of Atlanta. Very interesting metaphors are used here to show the infatuation of Shakespeare towards quibbles. The quibbles leads Shakespeare astray. Actually, the quibble leads Shakespeare astray in the wrong way, like the will of the wisp. Or say, so it makes him diverted like Atlanta becomes diverted by the golden apple. The quibble to Shakespeare is what like the infatuation of Antony for Cleopatra. Very interestingly, Johnson says, the quibble to Shakespeare was like Cleopatra to Mark Antony. It was a case of fatal fascination. In the case of Antony, we come to find that there is fatal infatuation and fascination for Cleopatra. Shakespeare was ready to miss the story by running after a word or a quibble, just as Antony was prepared to lose the world only for Cleopatra. Antony lost the world for Cleopatra, and Shakespeare loses the story following a quibble. And Shakespeare is equated with the infatuation of Antony towards Cleopatra. Shakespeare's weakness towards quibbles can be said as Mark Antony's infatuation to Cleopatra. Antony was prepared to lose the world for Cleopatra, and Shakespeare was prepared to lose the play only for a quibble or a word, and Shakespeare went to any extent running behind a quibble. And Johnson defends Shakespeare in the matter of unities also. There are people who criticize Shakespeare for not observing the unities, and Johnson